The dollar. Today, the global reserve currency that dominates the entire world. It feels as if it has always existed, natural, unquestioned, and inherently trustworthy. In the modern monetary system, there is the dollar, there is debt, there is interest. States borrow, markets fund, central banks manage the system and intervene when necessary. We tend to think this system began in America together with the dollar. But the truth is, this order did not begin with America. The modern financial system we witness today, the global order shaped around the dollar as the reserve currency, national debts, bonds, and the constantly rolled over, or attempted to be rolled over, debt mechanism, all of these are in fact the invention of an empire that existed before the dollar. Before the dollar, there was an empire that designed the system, and that empire ruled the world not with its soldiers, as in the modern era, but with debt. Welcome to Code 404, Economy, where the historical codes of money are revealed. The truth is always hidden in the details. Let us go to the most powerful era of the British Empire, a red color spreading across maps from Africa to Asia, a world where ships flying the Union Jack ruled the oceans, and the heart of global trade beat in London. When most people think of the British Empire, they think of wars, colonies, discipline, and naval dominance. But the true power of the British Empire was not in wars or weapons. It was hidden behind them, in a story where money was transformed into a weapon. Let us turn the calendar back to the 1600s. At that time, Britain was not yet the massive power we know today. Spain was bringing gold from the Americas, and the Dutch were far ahead in trade. Britain was relatively smaller, so what changed that, turned this island nation into a world-dominating superpower? The answer is simple. Britain developed a way to use money. Throughout history, the power of empires rested on three things: land, taxes, and war spoils. Rome survived through taxation. The Ottoman Empire through the Timar system. Spain through the gold it extracted from the Americas. But these sources had problems as well as benefits. Raise taxes too much, and rebellions would erupt. If territory stopped expanding, revenues stagnated. If spoils dried up, the system collapsed. Power was constrained by the natural limits of its source. Let us continue the story where we left off in the 1600s. By the late 17th century, Britain was in competition with France. War costs were painful, gold reserves were running dangerously low. The king was searching for a solution. He turned to merchants and investors and asked for support. In exchange for loans, he promised permanent interest payments. After all, future tax revenues would be collected. The collateral was solid. At that moment, Britain found a way to spend tomorrow's money today. This was a discovery that changed the fate of the modern world. To regulate and manage this debt relationship, the Bank of England was established. This was a revolution in economic history. Britain could now finance wars through credit. Empires are expensive. Ships, armies, fortresses, and colonies. All of them required enormous amounts of money to sustain. But with this new system, Britain gained access to financial markets and could outspend everyone else. Debt became the fuel of conquest. Britain could wage war without raising taxes or discovering new gold mines. Thanks to this system, Britain built the world's largest navy. It gained control over global trade routes. London became the world's financial center. Colonies borrowed from London, trade flowed through London, and money accumulated in London. The empire was wrapped in an invisible financial network. By the 18th century, London was no longer just a political capital. It was the financial capital of the world. Because Britain's debt was spread among thousands of investors, wars that would normally cause bankruptcy became manageable. Bonds were bought and sold like commodities. The empire was no longer supported only by the crown, but also by the invisible hand of capital. Britain was not just a military power. It was a massive accounting ledger. Other countries began copying the model Britain had invented. Debt was no longer seen as weakness, but as a sign of trust. A state that could borrow was considered reliable. By the 19th century, the British Empire had transformed into a vast financial ecosystem of cross-continental credit, insurance, and investment networks. The strength of the system did not come from the sheer size of Britain's wealth. Its real power came from the perfect alignment between financial institutions, wealth holders, and imperial policy. Britain fought more wars than almost all of its European rivals, and the financial burden was heavy. But unlike its rivals, Britain mastered the art of borrowing. All segments of society bought government bonds. These bonds were not just loans to the empire. They became investments in its rise. Victory meant economic stability, guaranteed repayments, and expansion. Even in defeat, the system was designed to secure repayment through taxation and colonial revenues. The miracle of this system was the continuity of debt. Debt did not merely finance wars, it became a permanent instrument of governance. But the empire's fate also became tied to the condition of financial markets. Like everything on Earth, this system had a cost. Debt had to be rolled over continuously. Interest payments could not be missed. If trust disappeared, the entire system would collapse. Before World War I, The British Empire was still the financial leader of the world, but politically, it faced growing challenges from Germany and the United States. The pound sterling remained the global reserve currency, and London remained the center of global trade. Imperial power was no longer measured only by military strength. Accounting ledgers were the real power behind the scenes. When World War I ended, Britain had won the war. But the state of its balance sheets was grim. Financing 4 years of war had cost far more than the Bank of England could create on its own. A massive bill stood before Britain, and the largest creditor was the United States. London had lost its status as the world's sole creditor. It had become a debtor. The irony was striking. The empire that had risen through constant borrowing now depended on Wall Street to survive. After the war, Britain chose to cling to past glory rather than confront reality. It sought to restore its former financial dominance. To elevate the pound and regain prestige, Britain returned to the gold standard. But the economy could no longer sustain it. As the pound became overvalued, exports collapsed. An industrial base already weakened by war lost its competitiveness. Unemployment surged. In trying to save its currency, Britain suffocated its economy. This was the empire's silent collapse. World War II delivered the final blow. Britain emerged from the war no longer a global power. This time, debt was destructive. Yet the system remained intact. Bond markets, reserve currency status, central bank control, and debt-financed power. The country that inherited this system was the United States. The pound was replaced by the dollar, London by Wall Street, the British Empire by the American global system. America did not create a new system. It expanded one that already worked. With the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, the power of the dollar became official. The dollar was pegged to gold, and all other currencies were pegged to the dollar. The world accepted a system revolving around the dollar. So what changed? Scale. The system was the same, but its reach was greater. While Britain managed an empire, America expanded the system to manage the entire world. And when the dollar permanently severed its link to gold in 1971, the debt-based order initiated by Britain became a global mechanism without boundaries. Today, this system is not practiced only by the United States, but by nearly every country on Earth. Modern states stand on debt. Central banks fund markets. Debt is not something to be eliminated, but something to be rolled over. In this system, the end of debt means the death of the system. And this order is not the result of coincidence or error. It is a legacy left to the modern world by the British Empire. So what is the lesson? Before the dollar, there was an empire that built the system. And that empire taught us this. If you finance power with debt instead of gold, you remove limits. But it also showed us this. Every order built on debt eventually collapses under the weight of that debt. This is a story from history, but it does not belong to the past. The modern world stands at the very center of this story. And perhaps the real question we should be asking is this: is the United States following Britain's fate, or will this time the story end differently? If this video gave you a new perspective, subscribe. The answers are hidden in history's codes. We reveal them.